Okay, so I think we now have the discussion session.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
We do.
Perfect. I'll share the slides that Matteo and I are going to present very briefly, and then we'll move into the discussion.
She has the slides.
Can you see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Let me just check the move. Does that go onto the second slide?
It does.
Yep.
Okay, good. Sometimes it gets stuck at this end. Okay, so hello to everyone, and thank you for staying until the end of the day and have this discussion session. So Matteo and I are going to talk a little bit about optimizing multi-wavelength campaigns and collaborations. We're aware that Poshak is also going to talk to some extent about this tomorrow morning, so I'm hoping there's not too much overlap, although I can anticipate that there must be a few things that we'll be saying that are similar to Poshak. Again, this is a huge, big subject area to discuss. There was a week meeting at the Lorentz Center a few years back now, which actually gave rise to the subject I think Poshak's going to talk about tomorrow morning. So I don't think we can cover the same amount as that which was done in a whole week of discussion, but we'll give it a go. I think this is probably a topic, even if you're a theoretician or someone concerned more with simulations, is also close to your heart. It's important that you've got a multi-wavelength observations to fuel your work. I mean, every single talk almost that we've seen so far this week, and many of the posters actually cover multi-wavelength observations. So hopefully you should feel concerned by this subject. So as we've seen and heard, and as we all knew before we even arrived, interacting binaries and especially microquasars are by excellence multi-wavelength and also multi-messenger emitters. I mean, we've seen pictures all week of these kinds of systems, but all of the different areas within the binary system emit in every single wavelength pretty much, and I've not included on here the multi-messenger aspect, which is now becoming extremely important. So it's obvious that we need to have multi-wavelength and multi-messenger observations to be able to understand these systems, and not only that, they're highly time variable. We'll address that aspect of this problem whilst trying to get multi-wavelength and multi-messenger observations, but we won't focus on that specifically. So I guess many of you in the room have already tried to get multi-wavelength observations. To do that, I guess you've put together a team. You've obviously found the science questions you want to answer. You've put together an extremely competent team, the team which has got skills in all the different multi-wavelength areas you want to observe in, and probably also with some people working on the theory of your subject and doing simulations. And then you need to request your observations to get your multi-wavelength data set. You can actually do this to some extent through joint programs. Different observatories allow you to ask not only for time within their observatory, but also joint with other facilities. But it's very, very limited. You probably can only ask from one, possibly two other observatories, and that makes things extremely difficult. Also, when you're writing a proposal, some tax are more sensitive to certain subjects and maybe not to others, and that can make it very difficult to get your proposal through. So you're going to be required to write many, many different proposals to get all of your multi-wavelength data that you want. All of these observatories have got different deadlines, and they all run through different observing periods. So you're obviously seeing that this is not an easy problem to solve. And then if you're very successful, you'll be able to hopefully get your your multi-wavelength data. Again, scheduling that data is going to be very complicated. And worse still, if you're trying to get a target of opportunity time, when you want to take multi-wavelength observations of your source when it happens to go into outburst or whatever it's going to do that's interesting to you. So let me pass on to Matteo, who will carry on with the next part of the presentation.
Yeah, so the issues we can run into when planning such a multi-wavelength campaign can be different. Of course, there's, first of all, a scientific problem. You have to have an excellent scientific problem that that deserves to be investigated with multiple instruments. But then there are technical problems. Not all excellent scientific programs can be done. You need to have a team with all the good expertise that can really tell you that a radio observation with certain condition can be done together with a gamma ray observation with the other instrument, and that both can point at the sky at the same time, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, in the instrument teams, there must be also the flexibility and the readiness to observe this to execute this program, which is not always feasible. And then, of course, there is a political, let's call it political in the best way, meaning putting together, let's say, convincing more people that a certain scientific problem deserves an investigation, and that the leaders, the directors of different observatories should give us time to do a certain program. Next slide. So, well, there are many examples of multiple facilities that work together. They're usually in the same wavelength, like, for example, the EVN or the VLBI infrastructures, right? They do have some time, dedicated time during the year to make observations. For regular observations, this might actually be feasible. And it's mostly a matter of really getting together the people leading the different infrastructures, the different missions, and deciding that a certain time of year will be dedicated to this kind of observations. Can it be done? Is it feasible? This is, I think, part of the discussions we want to have, because maybe you find something that will make this impossible, but it would be really good to actually have such coordination to make some of these observing programs feasible. If this was possible, then it would work like the EVN, for example. You get a single time allocation committee and not the Chandra allocation committee that you know, has to also allocate some HST time and some new star time and some XMM time, and you know, it's different when you have a single tech that has all the expertise to only think about multi-wavelength programs. We would not expect 1,000 proposals per year in this case, because they would only be a few proposals with a lot of human power and scientific excellence to be selected. And in this case, in this particular case, having fixed times of year dedicated to this would make scheduling simple with respect, for example, to gravitational wave consortia or transient or the follow-up of transients. So one thing we might want to discuss is, first of all, is it feasible? Second, what is the best way to do that? Memorandum of understanding, consortia of other kinds, Horizon Europe infrastructure, something like that. Last slide. Of course, everything we discussed for steady sources and for fixed times of year is still valid for targets of opportunity, but then it becomes, of course, more complicated because you don't have the security of the scheduling at a given time of year. So you have to coordinate the triggers, and the facilities have to be a very fast response, 24 hours a day, possibly. Of course, everything becomes more complicated, and you have to have telescopes with remote observing capabilities and dynamical scheduling, and very flexible. Not all missions are so flexible to guarantee this. Poshak will talk about SmartNet tomorrow, which is, I think, a very nice project that tries to address these issues. And also, if you read the original paper, Middleton et al., they also discuss much of what we are trying to discuss today with you all. I think I'll leave the floor to questions, comments, and what you might think about.
Matteo, are there any questions in the room or any points that want to be raised?
Is there nobody in the room, I think?
Okay, so on Zoom, we've got Greg. Take it away.
Sure. So the question about the sort of best way of doing these things, whether MOUs, consortium, etc. I've been involved with a lot of these. I don't like doing them ad hoc, but at the same time, some of the very formal structures like MOUs and consortia aren't always the best fit for the way a lot of astronomers do their work. And so I think my personal opinion is you want something that's the middle ground. You want to establish a team that's going to work together on something for an extended period of time, but perhaps not go through all the formal MOU type of actions. This is something that we've done now for over a decade with the Jackpot team. There are other ones I've been involved with. It generally works, but I am worried about, especially now as I grow older in my responsibilities, I do worry about the constant standard things like, how do we ensure that we're representing the best interests of our youngest researchers? How do we make sure that diversity issues and other issues like this are actually being addressed? These are things that do lend themselves better to consortia, MOUs, etc., than it does to a single scientific team.
Some very valid points there.
Okay, so you would be against something like a multi-wavelength EVN or something like that?
No, it's not that I'm against an EVN. So there's two aspects here. There's what the observatories do, and then there's what the researchers do. All right, and so forming a consortia that is based on what the observatories do, that is easy to support. But forming a consortia for what the observers, the scientists, are actually trying to do, that I think would be much more difficult.
Okay, so but turning this around the other way that Matteo was mentioning, maybe reserving several weeks per year with multiple observing facilities, where you could insert your multi-wavelength program indirectly. That would probably overcome this problem of having something very rigid, some kind of consortium, because every single group that wants to apply would be able to use this facility.
I guess I'm worried, now that other fields are starting to get into the time domain field, it's becoming a lot harder to get these things, and I'm not sure that reserved time is actually in the best interest of our particular scientific group. It may be in the best interest of science, but it may not be, given our need to respond to TOOs, and given the other teams sometimes not necessarily needing that for their multi-wavelength stuff, it becomes a lot easier to see that might tip the balance against TOOs.
Yeah, understandably, obviously, yeah. If they did reserve that time, then it would mean that you wouldn't have access to that facility should you require a TOO in an emergency. Has anyone else got any thoughts?
Yep.
Yes, Marianne is coming. Hi, yeah, Marianne here. So I wonder, you say TOOs are harder to get and execute, and I agree that it's much harder to get TOOs on whatever X different facilities, but once you actually have a trigger approved, aren't they easier to execute? Because all of these observatories already have like promised, okay, we will respond within X hours or days or whatever. I think that if you could have something where, yeah, maybe not with fixed time, but as Greg was saying, but if you would have something where you can like apply for TOOs on everything at the same time, might actually be easier. I mean, actually getting the observatories to agree to that is probably, I don't know who you'd have to be to force that. Maybe you can get the UN Secretary General or something.
On Zoom, we've got Maria who'd like to say something.
Yes, hi. This is regarding the comment of Marianne. It is not so easy for TOs.
Yes.
It depends on the observatory how many TOs it has. In the case of XMM, for example, or Chandra, I mean, they have many competing TOs, and depending on how easy it is to move your telescope, and to reschedule, it may be, quite challenging. For HST, it's an issue. I mean, they really don't react very quickly, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of this is the problem, that your observatory is not necessarily going to react on the timescales that you'd like them to react. Some observatories are extremely rapid, and they will point on source very quickly, whereas others need a lot longer to get moving, and this makes things complicated to coordinate.
Yeah, there is a question here. There is a question from the room.
Okay, go for it in the room.
Yeah, hi, this is Vicky. A couple of things for the TOs on multiple instruments, they have to be really highly graded, because that means whatever you trigger, you have to be pushing off somebody else who might have like time on there. So that gets really, really difficult. Also having fixed time for multiple years, it becomes all the more difficult because it depends on what the flavor of the year is in terms of science. For example, like FRBs and gravitational wave follow-up is becoming really popular nowadays. So that sort of pushes other micro-quasar stuff out of the way as well. Another thing is what Greg mentioned, to have people who are working on specific things and their interests based on their interest having some telescopes, because people working, again, they have to keep, like there's lots of postdocs involved in stuff, and they have to keep changing what exact thing they're working on depending on the kind of jobs they have. So even aligning all of that becomes difficult again. So I'm just stating a lot of difficulties, but any solutions to this would be nice.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Greg, did you want to say something again?
Sure, and always let other people speak for me because I speak too much. But we had it might have been last summer. It's all become a blur. But Chandra had a very good set of meetings. I think it was last fall, and we had essentially we had exactly this question, this sort of conflict of the people who want TOOs basically saying, oh, why can't you do more? Why can't you do more? Why can't you do more? The observatory saying, no, we can't do more. No, we can't do more. But eventually, I think we did sort of begin to maybe meet a little bit more in the middle. So I think it's not all doom and gloom. I think if we continue to positively push on observatories, they can actually consider new and novel ways to do the difficult stuff that they have to do. And I'm not trying to minimize what Chandra has to do in the least when we put in a TOO. It's a lot of work.
Indeed. Mike, you wanted to weigh in?
Yeah, along those lines, from my years of experience working for Chandra, you have constraints for the observatory, and of course, there's always competition for the constraints. And one of the problems that we used to kind of run into with joint agreements with other observatories is that there was never any reserve for coordination with the other observatories. So you always had pure Chandra Observatory observing science competing for the constraints for multi-wavelength observations. So I think one of the net effects of that is that NuSTAR, for example, was very generous to Chandra in giving out time, but Chandra in the end would typically give back 50% of the time that NuSTAR had. And I think that was partly because they were just running out of constraints. So, I mean, one thing that I had advocated to them to think about doing was set aside a reserve for multi-wavelength observations, that here's a set of constraints that is enough to cover the NuSTAR time that's been given to us. And if you use it for NuSTAR, great. And if not, it's not going back to the pool. So you're not saving anything. You take away the temptation to get rid of the multi-wavelength science that you promised to do, just so you can do regular observatory science. It's a tricky problem to solve, but I think that was definitely part of it. And you definitely saw within the Chandra TAC, because of constraints not being reserved, multi-wavelength time that had been promised by other observatories being given back. And it would be great to find mechanisms for that not to happen anymore.
Are those constraints, can those constraints be planned for? Like, if you have a fixed time of year for these kind of observations, for example, can people know in advance that a certain mission will not be able to observe?
You can plan for the numbers. So, I mean, you have to kind of ahead of time say that we're going to have fewer constraints available for the general population, just so we know that we have enough for the multi-wavelength. It's got to be a commitment from the spacecraft that you're not just having the time reserved in name, but you're putting aside the ability to do it as long as people find the science compelling.
Matthew, is there someone else in the room that wants to say something? Because if not, on Zoom, we've got another point raised.
Okay, go.
Okay, yeah, Pier Giorgio. I think you're muted still.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, thanks.
So I fully agree with all the comments and considerations that have been made. Of course, as a community, there are many things we can do to push for some of many of these solutions. But if we make a step backward, even before reaching to these serious issues, of course, I think there is something else as a community perhaps we could do to improve things. And this depends only on our community. So we don't need to push on tax or bigger solutions. Because I don't know about you, but to me, it happens many times talking to people about some personal campaign or observations. I got the answer, oh, really? You had that wavelength? I observed the day after or the day before. And so the scheduling didn't match just because we didn't talk about each other. Or I missed a radio coverage because I didn't know someone had a proposal ready to trigger and they didn't trigger it because I didn't know I was triggering mine. Of course, the solution could be to collect all the wavelength by ourselves individually, but this is perhaps not optimal. And this is actually something that the SmartNet tomorrow, Boschak will talk about. It's trying to solve, but we are actually finding some problems. So we are not very successful in having everyone using Smartnet, not even ourselves. We made Smartnet, we don't use it actually, not very often. So we are now trying to discuss this. There is a subset of people trying to find possible solution, and tomorrow for sure Boschak will summarize and will ask for more inputs. But I think this is basically to simplify this, to making it short. It's about improving communication within the community and to make it structural. So to make it obvious, unavoidable, that when I trigger something, this goes to the community as soon as possible, so that the community reacts and builds on this.
Yeah, I agree. I think that probably is the way forward, is to improve the communication. I think there's a lot of people, unfortunately, who are not aware yet of SmartNet. Even though it's been a couple of years it's been around. So yeah, raising the profile is probably a good way to move forward. And then hopefully people will know what other people are doing. Are there any points that wanted to be raised in the room still, Matteo?
Yes, there's one.
Yeah, this is Vicky again. Question, do you think something like a newsletter might help in terms of communication and putting forward who's triggered what on what in a month or maybe a week, and just like putting across what teams are working on currently? Or is there fears of getting scooped and stuff when that is put into question?
It's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
Finding the mailing list for who to send that out to would be very tricky, I think.
The only doubt I have about newsletters is that they get very quickly into spam folders, and because people, it's of course it's on the same line as Giorgio was discussing, like a way to, as a community, work and well, being also being able to share our projects and not being afraid of someone scooping you, as you were saying. It's always a fine line you have to walk, and I guess people do that with people they really trust personally. And I don't know, I think this can also be discussed for hours, days, months as an issue with open science in general. People being extremely secretive with their projects, and I don't have an answer to that, but any other ideas, comments?
I think we're coming towards the end of the time. We've actually already gone past the time allocated for this discussion session. So, as I said, Boschak will be giving his talk tomorrow morning, so we'll continue with this discussion then. Please fill in his poll that he's put onto the Slack channel, and well, I wish you all a very good evening. Maybe there's some comments from the SOC or the LOC.
No comments. Oh, someone.
I can have a short one. So one thing for all the speakers, we encourage you to upload the slides of your talks, the PDF of your talk, to Zenodo if you want to get a DOI identifier and to have it appear at some point at ADS. If you don't want to, we are not going to force you. But there's a possibility to upload your talks and to have like a permanent record and to show everybody else what you've done. Some people have already done that. Please do. Thank you, and have a very great evening in Sardinia with a lot of sun, hopefully, and nice Italian food.
Yeah.
Yes, and fill out the questionnaires, please. Yes, it would be extremely helpful. That too.
Thanks to all the speakers of the day, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for participating.
Bye all.